Ethics. Unit number 1, Nature and Scope of Ethics. Objectives. This unit aims at introducing the students to the philosophical need of ethics, starting from a brief discussion of moral law and how the human person in his or her process of growth intuits the ethical principle. Discussions pertaining to the dynamics of morality is undertaken to show how on the one hand new situations call for new responses from moral point of view, and on other hand certain fundamentals of ethics remain the same insofar as there is something of a common human nature adequately understood. Introduction. Let us begin our study of nature and scope of ethics by understanding what we mean by moral law. But two things need to be clarified before we raise the question with which we are concerned here. First, the moral law is called law only, metaphorically, or if one prefers, analogically. The primary meaning of law is a rule of action promulgated by him her who is in charge of a community in view of of the common good. This is called positive law. If the legislator is considered to be God, it is divine positive law. If the legislator is human person, and it is human positive law. Human positive law can further be subdivided according to what the common good aimed at is civil law, criminal law, commercial law, etc. In a case, a positive law lays down rules to be observed by human persons. It is prescription. Then there is another sense of law which is quite different. In this sense, it is a formula expressing a constant of behavior of things and of persons. So we have physical law, including laws is studied in physics, chemistry, biology, etc. Psychologically law, sociological law, etc. Since the constant of behavior among human person is less fixed and foreseeable than that among things, it is more of a statistical constant. As distinct from positive law, this kind of law is called natural law. It is descriptive. It can also be called prescriptive, to the extent if it is considered as willed by God, and includes the divine positive law, and descriptive to the extent that this divine will is the ultimate cause of the constant of behavior in things and human persons. However, moral law corresponds exactly neither to the positive law nor the natural law. On the contrary, the sense of the absolute should is an immediate datum 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 of the moral consciousness itself. Secondly, in the language of moral philosophers, moral law includes not only general and abstract rules of action, as do good and avoid evil, or in our language, the sense of the absolute should, but also particular and concrete precepts. Help the poor, obey legitimate authority, be truthful, do not kill the innocent, adultery is wrong, etc. These particular and concrete precepts we are here calling the specifications of the moral law. Hence, our question: how are the general data of the moral consciousness particularized and concreti- concretized in a specific percepts, and what is the cause of this difference among men? In terms of moral value, we can raise this question as follows: if the moral value per excellence is human person's self realization as human, how can this moral value determine specific moral values, and why is in their disagreement as to whether such and such an action is a good moral value or not? Moral intuitionism. All deontological theories agree that there must exist some rule or law which enforces moral values, and that it is natural to human person instinctively known. There is then an element of institution is all of them. So all of them, no matter how they conceive of it and the way they approach it, whether as conscience, outcome, logos, is stoics, moral sense, self-testimony, and a priori categorical imperative, Kant, right reason, Thomas Aquinas, and Suarez. This element of moral institution is also found in the teleological theories, whether implicit, implicitly or even explicitly. It is implicitly found in the concept of autarkia, Epicurus in that of eudaimonia, Aristotle, and explicitly in the concept of right reason, Hobbes, in the uh, conscious, in the conscientious feelings of mankind, Mill. And in fact, the more the idea of moral obligation is is prominent in an ethical theory, the moral explicit become the recourse recourse to this element of intuition or direct perception. This element of intuition is strongly emphasized by metaphysicists who maintain the moral language is objective and therefore informative. But here again they differ as to what the object of this moral moral intuition is. This difference is explainable by the difference in their meta-ethical theories regarding the meaning of moral good. Hence, for some, this object is the righteousness of a specific act, carried Pritchard. For others, it is a kind of moral property, simple and indefinable in non-moral terms. Moore. For others, it is a general principle, as the principle of utility itself, civic or a set of principles as the prima facie duties of fidelity, uh, reparation, gratitude, justice, beneficence, self improvement, and non maleficence. Rose. In ethics, the philosophy which insists on the necessity of moral institution is called ethical institutions. But even the most insistent of all moral philosophers on this element of institution is the moral consciousness, namely Kant. Not only does not deny, but on the contrary, explicitly states that the moral judgment includes elements derived from experience, which are therefore a posteriori as opposed to the a priori element. Kant denies the possibility of possibility of deriving particular and concrete moral percepts from the concept of particular reason alone. For this, the study of human nature is necessary. Similarly, Thomas Aquinas distinguishes between the first principle of the synthesis, which are self-evident, in, intuitively known by all, and which cannot be deleted from the human heart, and the secondary and more specific principles, which are derived from the former, as if by way of conclusion from promises. What is implied here is that this secondary principle require reflection. Thomas speaks of the difficulty involved in applying general principles to concrete uh, cases, even though principles, whether uh, theoretical or practical, can be evident in themselves. They may not be so evident to us, and this is due, according to Thomas, to wrong persuasions on the part of human person. Sauris is perhaps even more explicit in this doctrine that even the secondary principles, which like the primary are self-evident in themselves, require a certain amount of thought and experience. This is truer of the tertiary principles, which require study and discursive thought, but all moral principles can be derived from self-evident principles. One notable difference between Thomas and Suarez is that the former derives the concrete principle in a way corresponding to human person's natural inclinations. The latter derives them in a way corresponding to a legal system. For Suarez, these percepts have their immediate norm the good of human nature. The need of experience and reflection is similarly, indeed, even more insisted upon by contemporary ethicists. Why this greater insistence? Human person in search of himself, yeah, herself. We are dealing with here is to see whether a general principle such as serious promises should not be lightly broken is self-evident and therefore be counted among the first principles institutively known by everybody. If yes, how is it derived from the very first self-evident principle that good is to be done? Uh, Good is to be done, evil to be avoided. Is it merely by a kind of logical deduction? And if it is self-evident in itself but not known by all, is it because of some accidental reason such as ignorance or bad habit? Finally, if it is not self-evident, how is it that human person has today come to agree that such a general principle is correct, that it is a moral value? To speak more specifically of thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, Suarez, and Rose, are we to say that examples they give of first principles or of prima facie duties are meant to serve merely as examples, are meant to serve merely as examples, or are we to say that they are meant to be included among the first principles themselves? In the first case, we could perhaps disagree that the examples they give are good examples, but still agree with their doctrine that there exist first principles intuitively known by every man. The question would be then, which are these first principles? In the second case, to question the aptness of the examples would be to question their doctrine itself, irrespective of what such thinkers actually mean. We have got to study the problem in itself. If there is any principle that cannot be denied, it is the immediate data of moral consciousness. If these data cannot be denied, they are self-evident. They are self-evident not as principles, that is, as formulae, but as data, whether they are thematically formulated or not. The immediate ontological foundation of the moral obligation is human interrelatedness, and that the norm for moral good as distinct from the moral right is human person as the social being. We have also reflected how the only moral percepts which is immediately given, that is self-evident and cannot be justified on a mere moral level, is that human person should be human as an individual and social being. Hence, all other percepts what we are here calling specifications of the moral law must somehow or other flow from this fundamental percepts that a person should realize himself or herself as human. Human consciousness is in a process of becoming. Human person is becoming moral and more himself, and in the process of in the process, his awareness of himself develops. He has been continuously asking himself the question what he is. Human person is in a never-ending search of himself, herself. The more he she grows, the more he she becomes conscious of himself, herself as human person, and more he she is himself, herself. Moral consciousness is a part or an aspect of human consciousness. The more human person becomes himself, herself, the more he she becomes conscious of what he she should be. This lead to the emergence of moral percepts specifying ever more clearly the conduct of human person. Hence, the moral percepts, moral value flows from the first fundamental moral percepts that human person should be himself, herself. The moral value per excellence, not by way of mere logical deduction or of mere mediate inference. The former are related to the latter not simply as logical conclusions or as implicitly correlated on their premises. Logic has got to do with ideas, with mere ideas. It cannot be denied that this relation of the explicit to the implicit, of the clear to the unclear, to the unclear, of the concrete concrete to the abstract is here present, but it is present in the sense that the continuously developing human consciousness is related to its stages, past and future of its development. Existence is more than logic. If what we are saying about the progressive development of human consciousness and therefore of moral consciousness is true, one can easily understand the development of morals from the caveman to modern human person, from ancient slavery to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was approved without a dissenting voice in the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. Ignorance of the moral precepts is therefore not necessarily the result of perverse customs, as if this result were accidental. It is a fact of experience that perverse customs not only weaken the will to pursue the moral good, but darken the mind to recognize what the moral good is. But this is more easily possible on an individual level. Here we are placing ourselves on the level of mankind and its historical progress. The ignorance and the variety of morals can be explained why human historicity itself, that is, by the historical progressive development of his human moral consciousness. However, we must not easily take it for granted that this development has always and everywhere been a linear progress. It may be suffered setbacks, reverse, and regress. We need not go in that. What is more pertinent here to ask is whether we should reasonably suppose that human person has now attained the sum of his her self consciousness or and of his her moral consciousness. What is reasonable to suppose according to us is that he she has not, apart from the fact that one cannot predict the future. Contemporary moral problem of the morality of abortion hinges to a great extent on whether one should consider the human fetus a human person. The so-called women's liberation movement indicates, no matter what its merits and demerits are, that women have not been treated as full human persons everywhere in the world. One could think of many other indications. If progress is still possible, it can only be done by the passage of time and on the part of human person by experience and by his reflection on his own experience. Love and the moral percepts. Here we wish to bring into focus the moral salient moments of our reflection on the subject, bringing them to bear upon the topic at hand, to recognize human interrelatedness as the immediate ontological foundation of the moral order, and to act accordingly can be expressed in terms of love. Love is therefore the existential basis of the moral order. This leads us already to start thinking that love is the basic moral activity. The primary intuitively grasped demand that human person realizes himself as a human person is particularized and concretized in moral percepts. This too can be expressed in terms of love. Universal love is particularized and concretized. It is objectified in the moral percepts. Hence, as love not just one moral virtue among others, but the form of all the moral virtues. So, too, love is not just one moral percepts among others, but it is the form of all of them. It is what makes moral percepts. Indeed, it could hardly be called a percept, since taken by itself is a non-objectified sense. It does not prescribe anything definite, and in the same way, one can hardly call the moral realization of oneself as human as an obligation. This too, taken by itself, is a non-objectified sense, does not oblige human person to do anything specific, and there is hardly any meaning in the saying that human person should love. Love cannot be enforced, so too there is hardly any meaning in the saying that human person should fulfill himself as human. If love is the form of the moral percepts, and if love, like human moral consciousness, is a progressive affair, this means that acting accordingly to the moral percepts is acting according to love, and that this awareness admits of degrees. This means that love can also be considered to be not only the beginning of the moral life, but also its ends. At the beginning, it is present as a seed, which is more than mere potentiality, but already an actuality, albeit in a seminal form. The seed can develop into a fully mature and fully conscious lobe, and if it is in love that human person perfects himself as human, it is in this fully mature and fully conscious love that he/she does do. Many factors go in this process of maturing of self fulfillment. No matter how logically we can distinguish one human faculty or aspect of human person from another human person, is it totally one integrated whole, as it is not the intellect which understand but human person by his intellect, so too it is not with his her heart that human person loves, but human person by his heart, but heart is one's whole being. Love is an existential relation involving my whole existence. Suffice it here to remark already that though human person can develop one or other of his her faculties independently of the rest, or at least quasi independently, one cannot develop himself herself as a human person without developing the core of his her being, namely his her love, and this is not achieved by mere study and reflection, although these can be very useful, but by doing. As scholastics say, the operation is the perfection of being. The dynamics of morality. Here we examine two questions which are immediately linked. In an evolutionary visions of human person, to what extent can we say that morality, that is the specification of the moral law, are universally valid for all human persons? To what extent can we say that they are unchangeable? If one maintains if one maintains their universal validity, one is charged with absolutism, with holding the opinion of a static nature of human person incompatible with present day theories about men's dynamic and evolutionary nature. If, on the other hand, one were to maintain a relative validity, one would fall into a philosophically untenable moral relativism. Can the dilemma be overcome? The evolutionary nature of human person and of his human consciousness has long been recognized one way or another. Charles Darwin gave the theory of evolution a biological basis. An evolutionary view of the world or of human person is today at the basis of a great deal of scientific, philosophical, and theological thinking. And the thinking of such human person as Pierre Teilhard, D. Chardin, and of Aurobindo comes of course spontaneously to mind. Herbert Spencer is perhaps the best-known evolutionary ethicist. Starts by observing that both human and animal conduct insist in act adjusted to ends. The higher we proceed in the scale of evolution, the easier it becomes for us to obtain evidence of purposeful action directed towards the good either of the individual or of the species. This purposeful activity forms a part of the struggle for existence waged between individual members of the same species or between different species. But this type of conduct is, according to Spencer, an imperfectly evolved conduct. In a perfectly evolved conduct, which is ethical conduct in the proper sense of the word. This struggle for existence will yield place to cooperation and mutual help. Egoism and altruism will be both transcended. This leads Spencer to distinguish between absolute and relative ethics. Absolute ethics is an ideal code of conduct formulating the behavior of the completely adapted human person in the completely evolved society. Relative ethics is the nearest approximation to this ideal. According to the more or less perfectly evolved societies in which human person happens to find him her, Spencer adopts a utilitarian ethical principle. He takes happiness to be the ultimate end of life and measure the rightness of or wrongness of actions by their conductiveness to this end. From a nascent state when this utilitarian principle was dependent on non-ethical beliefs, it gradually developed to become independent and as suggested by the theory of evolution. It will continue to evolve and reach an ideal limit. Happiness, however, depends on the fulfillment of some condition, and these conditions are the observances of certain principles and rules which causally determine human welfare. Spencer acknowledges the existence of moral intuitions, which, however, are the slowly organized result of experience received by the race. In other words, an induction from experience handed down from one generation to the other ends up by becoming an instinctive moral reactions. Evolution is moving towards the emergence of the highest form of life. Happiness as the supreme end of the human person is the concomitant and virtue is the condition for its attainment. In the preface of the fifth and sixth part of his The Principles of Ethics, subsequently withdrawn, Spencer confesses that the theory of evolution had not provided as much practical guidance as he had hoped. What is peculiarly Spencer's is his interpretation of evolution as a teleological process directed towards the establishment of a higher and higher moral order. The constant and the variable in morality, whether or not man has evolved from subhuman beings, it is not for us to decide. But we can easily accept the theory that this human consciousness itself has nurtured and developed. At the beginning, human person was not necessarily conscious of himself herself as human as we today are. On the individual level, in this progress in human consciousness in a fact of experience. The child is a human being, but as it grows, it becomes more and more conscious of itself as a human being. We can accept this theory even on the level of mankind as such to explain How the moral law is particularized and concretized in specific moral percepts. Human consciousness involves one's consciousness of oneself as an individual and as a social being. Moral consciousness is an integral part of human consciousness. Primitive human, to call him so, must have been morally conscious. Otherwise, we are not entitled to call him her human at all. So, if moral consciousness belongs essentially to human consciousness as such, and in a univocal and not in an analogical sense. It has been a kind of constant in all the later stages of man's evolution. However, on the accepted theory that the human and therefore moral consciousness has been developing, the different stages of this development can be reasonably considered as the variable in human evolution. If we speak of moral consciousness at all, whether of the primitive human or ours, we must speak of it in terms of the immediate data of consciousness as foundation on the human order, more precisely on human interrelatedness, and these data to be in conformity to human reason and to be conducive to the self-realization of human person as human. But human moral consciousness has been evolving. This change take different forms, some of which are easily understandable and afford no real problem to ethics. Some are not so easily understandable and therefore afford some difficulty. As human person becomes more and more conscious of himself as human, as an individual and as a social being, she becomes more conscious of her human interrelatedness and of her rights and duties as a human person. This clearer self-consciousness is obviously concretized and particularized in specific moral percepts. Even at once given stage of human moral consciousness, different people living in different human situations affecting their interrelatedness will live a more or less different moral life. Such human situations can arise out of geographical, climatic, and economic conditions. Again, since moral consciousness has been in fact intimately linked to and conditioned by religious consciousness, different religious beliefs have produced different moral values, and a change in religious consciousness has often wrought a corresponding change in morality. The history of religion afford us with many examples, as human sacrifice, burning of witches, uh, Saturnalia, etc. This change is primarily and directly in religious consciousness and only secondarily and indirectly in moral consciousness. It is a change in the religiously conditioned morality. However, a change in civil law governing the mores of the people does not necessarily mean a change in morality. When the civil law declares that something is legal, it does not mean to say that it is moral. Civil law as such does not pass a moral judgment. Legal means allowed as far as the state is concerned. It is not the business of the state as such to promote the moral beliefs of one section of its population as against those of another. This is important to remember today when many countries proclaim themselves to be secular. Today, when society is increasingly pluralistic, the variable in morality raises the important question regarding the kind of certitude we can have in moral matters. To put it bluntly, if what is believed to be morally right today can be proved to be morally wrong tomorrow, and vice versa, can one be absolutely certain of what is morally right or morally wrong? Is a more philosophical term if human person is conditioned by his her existential situation, and if human and moral consciousness is always in a process of development and is dependent on physiological, cultural, social, psychological, environmental, and other factors. Can he she never be certain of having reached objective moral truth? if there is such a thing as moral truth. At the very outset, we have to distinguish carefully between moral relativity and ethical relativism. Moral relativity is simply the view that different people, especially in different civilizations and cultures, have had different moral beliefs, and what is believed to be morally right at the given time or place may be believed to be morally wrong at a different time or place. This is an undeniable empirical fact, but ethical relativism is the philosophical theory that no foundation exists. There is no universal moral norm or basis moral principle, but what is morally right is relative to the individual or group of men in question. If such a theory can give reason for such a position, a Sartre does. As Sartre does, it is ethical relativism in the strict sense. If it cannot give reason but simply admits that it is strictly impossible to say what is morally right and morally wrong, it can be reasonably called ethical skepticism. In an evolutionary view of human being, that is on the accepted theory that human consciousness of himself herself is increasingly developing, can we pretend to say that say the last word on what human person is? Obviously not. Human person's knowledge of his or self is a progressive and dynamic knowledge, always tending towards a better and better understanding. In this sense, human person's knowledge of himself herself is relative, and if this is true, his her moral knowledge is also relative insofar as this is progressive and far from complete. However, an attentive study of the evolution of human person's self-consciousness and of moral knowledge helps one discover a certain constant progression. That is, human person is becoming more and more himself herself. He she is becoming more and more conscious of what he she really is. His her moral knowledge helps him her to recognize himself herself and other more and more as persons. Like in all spheres of knowledge, a time of questioning, debate, and temporary disagreement is necessary in moral knowledge if progress is to be made. Indeed, a state of Indeed, a state of incertitude on some issues is a prerequisite and the presupposition of every progress. But whatever has been achieved is a definite acquisition, even if this acquisition remains still open to further advance and a deeper understanding. Let us sum up. Human person both is becoming. He she is and is in becoming, and in this is because he she is both essence and existence. Rather, he she is an essence in existence. He she is act and potency, or here again he she is act in potency. He she is spirit and body. Better still, spirit in body in existential term. He she is freedom and he is existentially situated. This is to say, he is freedom existentially situated. Human person is both an end in himself and for others a particular human and social being. He she can only find his self perfection in the perfection of others. Hence the dialectical tension in human knowledge of moral law, the tension between the is and the ought, between intuition and experience, or the a priori and a posteriori, between the static and the dynamic, the constant and the variable, the absolute and the relative. We can go on like that and infinitum. Thank you.